All right, today we're diving into type 2 diabetes, but we're going to look past the usual headlines. We're going to pull back the curtain on the incredible and honestly pretty stressful story of what's happening inside our bodies when this really complex fuel system starts to break down. Let's get into it.
So, this is the big question, right? This is what we're here to unpack. What is actually happening when the body can no longer efficiently use the energy from the food we eat? Well, as you're about to see, it's a wild chain reaction.
Okay, so where does it all start? It begins right here, with a core issue that might actually surprise you. In the early days of type 2 diabetes, it's not that the body isn't making insulin. The real problem is that the body's cells are starting to ignore it. They just aren't listening anymore.
You can think of insulin like a messenger that carries a super important order. That order is, hey, open up and let this glucose in for energy. But with insulin resistance, the cells are basically leaving that messenger on read. The signal is being sent, but the equipment that's supposed to get that message is, well, on the fritz. And this is probably the best way to picture it. Insulin is the key. The cell's receptor, that's the lock. With insulin resistance, it's like that lock is all rusted up. The key still fits, but you can jiggle it all you want, it just won't turn. And the result? The door, that's the glucose channel, it stays shut. So what happens? All that sugar, it's just stuck in the bloodstream with nowhere to go. Okay, so you've got all this sugar piling up in the bloodstream. The body's not just going to sit there, right? It's smart. It tries to fix the problem. So it does what any system under pressure would do. It just goes into total overdrive, launching this powerful but ultimately temporary response. But hang on, before we get into what that overdrive looks like, who is most likely to even start down this path? Well, a few major risk factors pop up again and again. It tends to develop in folks over 30. There's a really strong connection to obesity, and often there's a big-time family history component. And this is that overdrive in action. It's a pretty heroic effort, actually. The pancreas, which is the body's insulin factory, it senses all that extra sugar and basically screams, we need more keys, lots more keys. So it starts churning out huge amounts of extra insulin to try and force those rusty locks open. This state where you've just got a flood of insulin in your system, that's called hyperinsulinemia.
And what's so wild is that this crazy internal battle can actually show up on the outside of your body. The body can give us visible signs that something is going on, and one of the classic telltale signs is a skin condition called Acanthosis nigricans.
See, these crazy high insulin levels, they do more than just mess with your blood sugar. They have effects all over the body. That flood of insulin can actually stimulate skin cells, causing those dark, velvety patches of skin. And here's a really important point. The evidence suggests it's these high insulin levels early on that might also be linked to other major problems, like hardening arteries and high blood pressure. But you know, you can't run an engine in the red forever, right? That state of overdrive just can't last. Eventually, that amazing little organ, the pancreas, it starts to get exhausted. And this is the crucial tipping point and the whole story of type 2 diabetes. This timeline really paints the whole picture for us. First, you get insulin resistance. Then, the body compensates with that insulin flood, hyperinsulinemia. But over time, the little beta cells that make the insulin, they just get worn out. They start to decline, and insulin production finally drops. And that right there, that's the game changer. Because now the body has two huge problems. The locks are still rusty, and now there aren't enough keys to even try. That's when you get that chronic high blood sugar we call hyperglycemia.
You know, all that strain for so long, it causes actual physical damage to the pancreas. If you were to look at it late in the game, you'd see the signs of this long battle. You'd see scarring, which is called fibrosis, and even a buildup of these weird proteins. The insulin factory itself is quite literally breaking down from being overworked for years and years.
So once the system gets to this point, what do? How is it managed? And what happens when things go really wrong really fast? Well, the approach is pretty logical. It's a step-by-step process.
So you can see here, it almost always kicks off with the foundation, lifestyle changes. Things like diet, exercise, and weight control are the absolute first line of defense. All of that is designed to help the body start listening to insulin again. If that's not enough, then you move on to oral medications. And then, way down the line, if the pancreas is just completely exhausted, that's when insulin therapy becomes necessary.
All right, what about the really scary stuff, the medical emergencies? A lot of us have heard of DKA, or diabetic ketoacidosis. But you know what? It's actually not that common in type 2 diabetes. That's because there's usually still a little bit of insulin around. The one you see more often in type 2 is called HHS. It's a state of super high blood sugar and dehydration, and it can be sneaky because it develops a lot more slowly.
And of course, we have to talk about the long-term damage. This constant battle with high blood sugar, often mixed with high blood pressure, really wears down the body's entire plumbing system. It can lead to something called hyaline arteriolosclerosis. It's a mouthful, I know, but it basically just means the tiny arteries get thick and hard, and that damage can cause problems in vital organs all over the body.
But just when you think you've got it all figured out, the story takes a really interesting twist. Because sometimes someone, especially a younger person, can have what looks for all the world like type 2 diabetes, but it's something else entirely, something written right into their DNA.
It's a condition called MODY. Now, this isn't an autoimmune problem like type 1, and it's not caused by the same kind of insulin resistance we've been talking about with classic type 2. Nope. MODY happens because of a specific tweak, a mutation, in one single gene that messes with how the body makes or uses insulin.
This chart here just lays it all out so clearly. Type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune attack. Type 2, that's our two-part problem, the rusty locks and then the factory burning out. And MODY, that's a direct genetic issue, and it often shows up in younger folks who don't really fit the profile for the other two. It really just goes to show you, the world of diabetes is way more complex than you might think.
And so that brings us to a final, really big question. When you look at all these different ways things can go wrong, autoimmune attacks, rusty locks, specific gene mutations, are we actually looking at one single disease called diabetes? Or is it more like a whole family of different conditions that just happen to end up with the same problem, high blood sugar? Definitely something to chew on.